In this final video, I'm going to give you some personal reflections on lessons learned, and of course with a main focus on how to use this experience in regarding to a risk analysis. Gotland is an island, of course, and the traveling to and from the island was also covered by good information to passengers with the airplanes or with the boats, of course. One key thing was that the bacteria was found by a routine control program. This is, of course, very important. Also, no person sought medical care due to drinking water contamination. The laboratory analysis I would like to elaborate a little bit on. Looking at the risk analysis in regard to sampling, what is the worst case number of sampling points that could happen if you look at your water network? Also, importantly, what is the total time to collect the sample? That is traveling out to a sampling point, traveling back to the waterworks, getting the bottles, labeling the bottles, and then making the sample ready itself for the laboratory, and then shipping time to the laboratory. Is it 1 day or 2 days? How fast can you get the sample to the laboratory? Also, connected to this, what is the time for analysis and receiving the results? In this particular case, the lab used was overloaded, so other labs had to be called in to solve the analysis challenge. Also, the contracted laboratory, what is the maximum number of samples per day? As I said before, in this case the lab was overloaded. You need to know what is the limit for the lab you're using based on how many worst case number of samples you will send the lab. In the risk analysis, you have to look at alternative laboratories if you have or may have a problem with overloading your contracted laboratory. Finally, maybe you should have an extra supply of sample bottles in storage if there is a great number of sampling points. This might not be a big issue, but important to keep it in mind. Information about the contaminated drinking water was communicated within 24 hours. And furthermore and importantly, a crisis group was assembled, made up by all the vital disciplines to solve and work with this problem. Questions came continuously in from the public and was answered by the region, by the media, that is the Hela Gotland.se and Radio P4 Gotland. I would like to make a little deviation here in regard to the invaluable experience this situation was for future planning. Big water organizations having large drinking water networks with several waterworks will of course benefit greatly from this experience here. Another risk is pandemic, which we recently went through for about 1.5, almost 2 years. And in that case, I would say access to goods and particularly access to disinfectants. Meeting restrictions, that is when you are meeting, for instance, as a waterwork, trying to fix the piping, make disinfection, so forth and so on. Overcrowded hospitals. This we have seen in the pandemic that we just passed, and that could also be a definite problem if this happened during a pandemic. And lastly, in regards to pandemic, own sick key personnel. For handling this stressful and tough situation, you will depend on having key personnel that is experienced in the water handling, of course. Then we have another risk, that is if it happens during the tourist season, when you have peak demands for drinking water. In Gotland, this is during the summertime. Going up north in Sweden, you have ski resorts where you have a peak demand during wintertime. And then when you have holiday season, your own personnel could also be on holiday that you need to consider in regard to the risk analysis. Furthermore, deliberate disinformation. In one of the interviews that was made, one person noted that we have a very bad global situation, and was this a terrorist attack? This could be very, very bad, looking at how important communication and information was to contain this crisis during these 12 days. Smaller companies that needs drinking water continuously. This was also noted in this crisis in regard to dentists. And dentists need water continuously. One thing could be that you refer patients to the areas that are not affected maybe, and possibly that opening hours is extended for the dentist by the colleagues opening their practices for colleagues that are having practices in the affected areas. Now, these are my points, relevant or not, but what can the companies prepare for themselves when something like this happens? That will greatly take down the overall risk for damage when you have a water problem. This was a crisis, but given the situation and how it came out, it was an excellent stress test for the future. Now, before I go over to give you a whole picture overview, I would like to look at two examples. First, you have the hospital, which had prepared for situations like this. And in the background here, you can see something that says dricksvatten on the tank. And this tank was connected to the piping for the drinking water distribution in the hospital. And that water came from waterworks on other parts of Gotland that was, of course, not affected by the bacteria breakout. It's important when you look at the hospitals, because here you have to look at the detail. How do you connect this type of external water system to your existing water system? How do you protect the taps, the points where you connect? All of this needs to be a risk analysis, but this was done by the hospital in Visby, and in routine way it was connected up, and the hospitals came through this crisis without any problem in regard to the drinking water. Second example is the slaughtery that are in Visby. They also need water to clean, to do their product processing. And they needed to take samples every day of their water, but they also had a chlorination station where they could, fix the incoming water and take the bacteria away by disinfection. Now, this is also something that companies that are using water, can they have a preparation in order to stop this situation affecting the companies? So, to give you a picture of the picture, quote unquote, on day 0, the bacteria was found by the routine analysis, and during day 1 to 12, the crisis was contained in that the source for the contamination was identified, but as I said before, importantly, the recommendation to boil the water was communicated very early so that no one needed to go to the hospital due to the bacteria outbreak. Now, the third part of this is the toughest one, and that is flushing and cleaning of the network, as I've talked about before, establishing why it happened and how do we prevent it from happening in the future. Lessons learned, so to speak. And here you have the HACCP handbook in Sweden to make these risk assessments for waterworks. And I would say that this experience is indeed extremely valuable for all water organizations, including, of course, the one in Gotland, to use this and work with the HACCP to enhance and improve the risk minimization for the drinking water protection. Thank you for listening to these videos, and I really hope that you have or can take something from them into your organization to implement and have use of what you have just seen. So with that, I thank you and wish you a good winter and a good Christmas. Take good care. Bye bye.